Welcome back, everybody, to Watcher of All Things. My name is Kiki, and this is my podcast where I talk movies, TV shows, and all things entertainment. And today it is episode 133, where we are finally, at last, talking about Jane Schoenbrun's newest film, Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma, or Miasma, depending on the pronunciation. Been looking forward to this film for a very long time. It's had very, very, very good reviews ever since it showed at every single film festival that it's been at. Recently watched I Saw the TV Glow. I was a big fan of that movie. I thought it was extremely interesting. This film will be no different. I saw this a few days ago and I'm still trying to fully wrap my head around it. I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation about this movie today. I think there's just a lot that you can really pick apart, and Jane Schoenbrun, they are one of the most original storytellers right now, and the way they wear their homages and their sort of inspirations on their sleeve, or the things that they love so much on their sleeve, is very, very interesting. But before all of that, I hope you're doing well. My God, August is coming to an end. I hope you've had amazing summers. Very excited for things to come. We have TIFF in 3 weeks. I am actually, after I record this, going to work on my schedule, going to maybe send out some screener emails, stuff like that. We really do have to put in the legwork ahead of time because my goal is 20 films this year. It's going to be a great time. If you're listening and you are at TIFF this year, feel free to say hey. I was super busy and went during the second week last year, so I missed a lot of my favorite reviewers or fellow bloggers. But if you're around, feel free to say hey. It's going to be a really great festival. But as for today's episode, of course, we are going to start with the news portion of the show where we have some fun stuff to talk about. Then we will jump into non-spoilers for Camp Miasma and then spoilers. And we're going to round out the show with what else I watched, where we have some very fun stuff to talk about, including Lanterns episode 1, which I thought was phenomenal. And I'm excited to talk about it today. But okay, before all that, again, timestamps below. You don't want anything spoiled for you. You don't want Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma spoiled. Make sure you just listen to the non-spoiler section. But let's do it. Let's jump into the news. All right, our first piece of news. We have a new Kratos for the God of War series that, remember, because of Ryan Hurst's really bad injury, I think he tore a bicep or a tricep, something crazy, painful like that, and it would take a very long time to recover after surgery. Unfortunately, had to be recast, which is very sad because I thought Ryan Hurst was fantastic as Mentor in the Odyssey, and I was excited for him to take on another big role like that. But we have a new Kratos. According to Deadline, Dave Bautista has closed his deal to play Kratos in Prime Video's God of War fantasy drama series. Series co-studios Amazon MGM and Sony Pictures Television reached out to Bautista and initiated talks shortly after they made a decision to recast the role following original lead Ryan Hurst's serious onset injury. Now, before I get to actual Dave Bautista and what I think of him taking this role, I am very confused about the timeline of this because there were some sort of conflicting reports about how much of the film or how much of the show had they actually filmed so far. Had they gotten through the entire first season? Are they going to have to shoot around Ryan Hurst in every scene and basically redo all of his stuff with the new actor? I don't think so. I think the last update that I read was that they had fully finished season 1 or almost entirely finished season 1. And for season 2, they are not only recasting Kratos, but whoever Kratos' son is in God of War. I think they're recasting for season 2 as well. So it's going to be new stars in season 2. Might even be a completely different sort of vision for it. I'm not sure, but it seems like there's a lot of moving pieces in this. Obviously, it's a bit of a disaster that, Dave Bautista has to come in because of such sad circumstances. But as for Dave Bautista, I do find it very interesting that he is taking this role because if you aren't aware, obviously he's a former pro wrestler and he was a huge, big, hulking guy. He plays Drax in the Guardians of the Galaxy films. He's hilarious there, but he has been slowly sort of fleshing out his acting career outside of those. And I think he is a very, very, very talented actor, but he hasn't quite reached the heights that I wish he could have because I do think he has a very good dramatic side to him. But other than Drax, I'm not sure what he's really taking on that's worth chewing on. I thought he was fantastic in Blade Runner 2049, and I thought that movie was going to be a real turning point for him because yes, he's a big hulking guy in that, he usually is, but at the same time, that's a Denis Villeneuve role, and he's done Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2 and been really good in those movies. But outside of his work with Denis Villeneuve, it doesn't seem like he's really gathering a lot of roles that are going to, I don't know, it's just be a little more elevated. It seems like he's doing like a lot of Amazon Prime Video originals where it's a goofy comedy starring him and Jason Momoa, or him and an 8-year-old girl, and they're on the run and they're a dynamic duo type thing. It's just a very, very, very different career from what I thought he might have. It's almost like he is The Rock 25 years ago after he left wrestling, but maybe he's taking on some more dramatic stuff, unlike The Rock, who didn't quite have some of the bigger roles that he could really chew on at the start. He still really doesn't, to be honest. I mean, The Rock has the smashing machine, but other than that, I would love The Rock to take on some more serious stuff, because I do think there's an actor in there. But Dave Bautista stepping in as Kratos, he has spoken publicly about wanting to lose weight and not be this giant guy, because it's just harder to move and he wants to rely on more on his acting. I will say The Last Showgirl, he was very good in that movie as well, and I wish he would sort of stick to stuff where he could be like a club owner and he just happens to be a big guy. But him stepping in as Kratos and having to probably gain all of this muscle back, he's going to have to be very fit, and I mean, he's already bald, so at least they got that nailed down, and financially they can save money on the Kratos character and razors, unlike Christopher Abbott for Professor Charles Xavier if they make him bald from the start. But I'm not really sure what to make of this as a career move for Dave Bautista. Is this a step backwards? Is this a step forwards because he's going to be a series lead in what could be a very good TV show for Amazon Prime? It's all sort of up in the air. I was expecting him to take on some bigger roles outside of Dune Part 1 and Part 2 and then Blade Runner 2049. Obviously, he's been in a James Bond movie, but he was, the goon for the villain. That was this big hulking guy. So we'll see where he goes from here. Good for him getting more work, getting that paycheck. He's a very cool dude. I think he has a lot of really great things that he talks about in his personal life and public support that he has for certain things that I truly do appreciate. So go Dave Bautista. All right, let's talk about Marvel, because it seems like every week they're either completely back and I'm super excited for it, or I am completely depressed by them. So this week there was a initial look at the book for the sort of artwork behind Spider-Man Brand New Day and all the concept art, the designs for all these different things. And the new Spider-Man Brand New Day book, according to multiple sources online, revealed that AI generated concept art was used for designing New York City in the film. This initially was a huge bummer, because this movie's entire sort of campaign in the lead up to its release says, oh, we're doing this one like a real movie, and Tom Holland, Destin Daniel Craig, everybody talking about practical effects and practical set pieces and things like that, the suit, all of that stuff, absolutely true. But I am very annoyed by, in the conception phase, they are turning to generative AI for, historically the most documented city on earth, maybe New York City, where it seems like there's a billion photos of one of the most popular cities in the world. And I was absolutely depressed by this for a few days, but then the publisher of the Spider-Man Brand New Day concept art book came out explaining in detail which process they used for the specific art, having used the cloning tool and photo bashing, admitting that it was just laziness but no AI usage. The company also has an anti-AI policy, or multiple anti-AI policies. Now, I hope that's true. I am sure that there was generative AI used at some point in the process. Look, I, work in the artistic industry, and I have no doubt that there are people cutting corners using generative AI in the conceptual phase for things. What really disappoints me is that, Marvel just fired their longtime creative development lead, or lead developer. I can't remember what his official title was. Was it Andy Park was his name? He had been there for, 15 or 20 years, and he was the head of their visual development department, and they fire him. And then immediately on this film, we are getting news of, oh, did they use, concept art that was generated by AI for New York City? Again, one of the most documented cities in the world. And then you have the Avengers Doomsday debacle, where the entire trailer looks like it was generated in Grok and ChatGPT. And it's like, the Avengers Doomsday trailer, I've made this joke many times, but it literally looks like one of those tweets where the dude is like, Hollywood is shaking. We created this in 20 minutes on a micro budget, all within Grok, and it's the worst thing you've ever looked at. I hope this is not the case. I hope that they are truly employing artists, making films the old school way, because if you do, people will come and watch the movie, like the Ice Cream Man or Iceman, whatever that fucking Eli Roth piece of shit movie was, that had entire AI generated sequences, got absolutely dogged on at the box office and reviewed just to smithereens of shit all over the place. You know, if you don't put in the effort to your film, people won't reward you. If you put in the effort to your film, people will reward you. I think that is maybe the lesson of 2026 is like Obsession, Backrooms, Spider-Man Brand New Day, The Odyssey. Movies that have love and care and attention behind them will be rewarded in a really special way. People will come and see your movie if they see how much you care about your own project, how much you care about a story. It's very fascinating to me because even these smaller films this year that have no business making so much money, whether it is the drama, you know, this adult dark comedy starring two very big Hollywood stars, made like quadruple or triple its budget. Like it made a lot of money, the drama, at the box office. And you kind of wonder why. And I think it's because there's a lot of care that goes into these performances from the actors. Christopher Borgli, I think, wrote a really good script. Or you look at Project Hail Mary, which, you know, didn't blow away the box office, but did extremely well for a 2.5-hour sci-fi film coming out in March, you know, or Sinners last year. There's so much love and attention put into Sinners, one battle after another. These movies that, you know, of course have huge people in them, whether it's stars or people behind the camera, but the amount of love and care that go into these films and like storytelling, or The Odyssey this year with Christopher Nolan, filmmakers right now need to learn. You don't need all the gizmos. You don't need the gadgets. If they are part of your story and part of your filmmaking, like say IMAX and The Odyssey, and it's a really cool way to sort of progress the medium, absolutely, those are great things that can be advanced. But otherwise, I think your own storytelling and the amount of art and classic sort of storytelling and classic artistic integrity that can go into projects will really push you further than you would think. I think that should be a big lesson for Marvel specifically this year with like Thunderbolts last year, although it didn't do great at the box office. People were like, oh yeah, this is solid. This is what these used to feel like. Or Superman at times just felt very old school. Like, yeah, there's clearly a guy making this movie that loves it so much. And anyways, that's sort of my rant on, you know, make art again, or whatever it might be, I guess. But speaking of Marvel, they are also in a little bit of hot water just because of Blade being canceled. And now we have Wonder Man and Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, who of course played Wonder Man, Simon Williams. He says the optics of Marvel canceling Black-led projects like Blade and Wonder Man is obvious. Quote, it should be a priority to change that narrative and to do what it takes to responsibly change that narrative with quality stories, with quality resources. And I do find it very strange how Marvel is really not advocating for any of their projects that are led by a person of color in the last few years. Well, actually in the last like year and a bit since Trump was basically sworn in. I mean, whether it's Ironheart barely promoted that project, like just completely let it flounder out and fail. Wonder Man, they did some promotion, but I wouldn't say it was very widespread. And especially with a season 2 in the works, they just completely canceled it and gave up on it. Then they have Blade, which they were trying to get off the ground for 4 years. Blade should be one of the easiest characters in the MCU to make. He's a fucking vampire and he's a vampire hunter. Like, dude, what else do you need? Just do the movie. You have one of the best actors of our generation and you're just sitting around twiddling your thumbs like, oh man, how are we going to do this vampire hunter movie? It's like, this is a home run. Like, this is a slow pitch. They're giving you a freebie. It blows my mind how much Marvel is really blundering the diversity of their projects right now. And I'm hoping Black Panther 3 can sort of get something through the door in a really interesting way, because I think Ryan Coogler, such a fantastic storyteller, but I want to hear other diverse voices as well. I'm hoping X-Men is going to really rely on the analogy and the story that is behind the original X-Men of being the civil rights movement and being about, you know, queer people and people of color or minorities in general who have been mistreated by society. Because, you know, newsflash, if you don't know, the X-Men are of that era and they are all about people that have not been accepted by society, and society is targeting them. So I'm hoping that, you know, Marvel Studios will learn its lesson and be like, hey, we have a chance to tell a real story here. So hopefully Jake Schreier can do that. I feel bad for Yahya Abdul-Mateen II. I really want Wonder Man to come back. I would love if Simon Williams came back like in another fashion. Imagine he came back in the next Spider-Man movie and it's a team up. That would be hilarious to me, but we'll see what happens. But let's move over to Marvel Studios' rival I guess they're rivals. They're rival DC Studios. The Daily Planet posted an update this week saying the Daily Planet announced today it will begin production on an 8-part documentary series that will dive back into Metropolis's most infamous murder trial. The People versus Gorilla Grodd will take a fresh 360-degree look at the case, revealing a lesser seen side of the hyper-intelligent ape, according to the film's first-time director, Jimmy Olsen. Olsen was granted unprecedented exclusive access to interview Grodd inside Strikers Island Penitentiary for the documentary. So if you don't understand what any of that press release meant, we are getting the Jimmy Olsen True Detective, True Crime, Gorilla Grodd, not True Detective, Gorilla Grodd TV show, where he is going to be doing like this deep dive week to week 60 minutes type thing. I'm excited for this. So DC Studios adds Skylar Gisondo as Jimmy Olsen, Jimmy Tatro as Gorilla Grodd, Beck Bennett as Steve Lombard, Michaela Hoover as Cat Grant, Wendell Pierce as Perry White. There's a bunch of other people also showing up that I know from other things who are very, very, very funny. There's one guy from the Righteous Gemstones. He's very funny, and I'm excited for him to be in this. There's that one dude who's going to be in Meet the Fokker-in-Law, the new one that's coming out, and he was also in Stranger Things. He's a pretty funny dude, but I do think he just plays the stoner and everything. But this sounds really fun. You know, I think Lanterns is a real success right now. Episode 1 was phenomenal. We're going to talk about it later. Supergirl, huge bomb. Obviously, that movie just did not work. I think that's going to be DC Studios' Incredible Hulk when we look back in 10 years' time, perhaps, unless they completely flounder and employing the exact same 4 people to make every single movie. We'll see what happens, but I think this could be incredibly fun, a very sort of different project where we're just focusing on a team that a lot of people wanted to see more and more in Superman. So I'm excited for this. I think, you know, Skylar Gisondo as Jimmy Olsen was really fun in Superman. I think he plays the perfect sort of young, naive, beat detective, whatever you want to call it, reporter who is, you know, Superman's pal. He's Clark Kent's BFF. And I love Jimmy Olsen. He's always been a very, very, very fun character. And people don't realize like how important Jimmy Olsen is to DC lore. I'm fairly sure Darkseid's first appearance was in a Jimmy Olsen comic. Like, he's a very big deal. And that's what people need to understand with Jimmy Olsen is like, there's a much deeper lore to him than people want to give him credit for. But that's going to be a really fun project. Looking forward to that. I think, you know, Clayface comes out in October. I'm excited for that. I'm incredibly excited for Creature Commando season 2 because I loved season 1. Extremely excited for Man of Tomorrow because I loved James Gunn's Superman last year. There's still a lot of great stuff coming from DC Studios to be excited for. Obviously, they're reshuffling a lot of their plans like I talked about last week. Projects are being canceled, but there's still a lot of cool stuff like Dynamic Duo, Man of Tomorrow, you name it, they're making it. I just hope they can nail Batman. All right, let's wrap up the news there though. Once again, timestamps below. Don't want to spoil anything for Camp Miasma for you guys. This is a really cool original project from I think one of the most original directors out there right now, Jane Schoenbren. This isn't going to be the most figured out review because there's still a lot about this movie that I'm like, or did it mean that? Or there's just a layer of this movie that's very difficult to sort of get through. And I'm excited to talk through my feelings all about teenage sex and death at Camp Miasma. Spoilers ahead after the non-spoiler section. Pay attention to the timestamps, then we'll have what else I watched. But let's do it. Let's talk about Camp Miasma. Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma is a 2026 horror slasher comedy fantasy, all of the things, coming in at 1 hour 52 minutes. It is directed and written by Jane Schoenbren, who of course did I Saw the TV Glow a few years ago. Absolute smash sensation. This film was made on a budget of $10 million and currently has very good reviews, 7.2 on IMDb, 95% on Rotten Tomatoes with an 84% audience score, 3.9 on Letterboxd with a 4-star mode. The synopsis for the film: after years of slapdash sequels and waning fandom, the Camp Miasma slasher franchise is handed over to an enthusiastic young director for resurrection. But when she visits the original's star, a now reclusive actress shrouded in mystery, the two women fall into a blood-soaked world of desire, fear, delirium. The film stars Hannah Einbinder, star of Hacks, one of my favorite favorite comedy people out there as Chris. Gillian Anderson, one of my earliest crushes, who played, of course, Scully. She plays Billy in this film. Amanda Fix, Arthur Conti, Eva Victor, Zach Cherry, Sarah Sherman, Patrick Feischler, Dylan Baker, Jasmine Savoy Brown, Quintessa Swindle, Kevin McDonald, of course, is a Canadian legend, was on Kids in the Hall, Sky High, Jack Haven, Aaron Buchholz, Florence Barrett, Jordana Summer, Ryan McEwen, William Vaughn, and Hunter Dillon. Here are my initial thoughts on Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma. This movie is very dense. It's very fun. It's very tragic in some parts, and it's super thoughtful, and I very much enjoyed it. I think it needed a minute to sort of piece all together for me, but it's very cool. I had like a great theater experience watching this film with a very cool crowd, and it's one of those movies that in the sort of following days, I can't say I'm totally in love with this movie because there was just things about it that I was like, all right, I get it, but it's a movie that I have thought about a lot in the last few days, and I've really enjoyed thinking about and trying to piece it all together. But like I said, I saw this with a very cool crowd. Obviously, Jane Schoenbrunn is probably the biggest trans filmmaker out there right now. They have a really great following online with tons of people supporting their dreams and aspirations, and they've talked about how much pressure that can actually be. They were on The Big Picture last week alongside Hannah Einbinder and Gillian Anderson, and I just thought, like, man, every interview Jane Schoenbrunn does, they are just so articulate and cool, explain things so well, and they're so damn funny, and I think that really does come across in their writing. But what they represent for trans artists, trans hopeful filmmakers, and people that want to get into the space, there is a world where it's possible. You can make a $10 million film like this. You can sort of be out there. You can make these really fantastic films like Camp Miasma, like I Saw the TV Glow. I was in a very alternative crowd where it was a lot of very cool, excited people who were clapping and had really great reactions throughout the film. It was also just a very visibly diverse crowd with a lot of people who were very out and proud, and it was a sold out show. I actually saw this at the TIFF Lightbox. I didn't see it at Cineplex because I wanted to see it a few days early, so I saw it on, I think, a Tuesday night instead of like the Friday or Thursday, and man, packed crowd. Like, there was not a seat left. It was also being projected on 35 millimeter, and sometimes, you know, I'll walk straight out of a movie and put my headphones in and just like listen to music or a podcast, but this time I really wanted to hear what people around me were saying after clearly watching it for their first time because it had just been released, and it was just like glowing reviews all over the place. And I just heard some very wholesome things of people being like, oh, it's so cool that a trans filmmaker can make something like this, and they are so popular and able to promote things out there in such a cool way. And it very much just warmed my heart of seeing this sort of communal experience take place in front of me and people really being able to share a moment in a really heartwarming way. But performances in this film, let's talk about it. Let's start with Hannah Einbinder, who plays Chris. She is a queer director who is hired to make like the 7th or the 8th installment in the Camp Miasma franchise, and she knows the deal. She's being brought in as sort of a diversity hire because she's a queer filmmaker and she understands the optics of it all. I love Hannah Einbinder in this film. I think she is hilarious. She's extremely daring in some moments, but she really does just command the screen in a fantastic way. Like, I think there's not a minute of her screen time where she's not keeping up with a huge star like Gillian Anderson. It never feels like there's a gap in talent or ambition or of the ability to hold attention on the screen. I really just have to commend Hannah Einbinder. Obviously, you know, she's been acting with Gene Smart on Hacks for many years, and that show has unfortunately come to an end now. So she knows how to play against a big star and really sort of bring that chemistry to life. And if you're a Hacks fan, you know there's a true sexual tension between Deborah and Ava. But like, this film, it is palpable how sexual it is. And like, this film is all about desire and stuff. But I'm really excited to see Hannah Einbinder take on this next stage of her career post Hacks, where she can maybe take on more roles like this, where she's leading in a more artistic, auteur-driven story. I know she has a movie coming out with Justin Theroux, and I can't remember what it's called. I think it debuted at Sundance this year, and I'm excited to see that because, like I said, I'm a huge fan of her. I think she is hilarious, but in this film, she's really good dramatically and gets to do a lot of other really interesting things. Obviously, I think she plays the comedy so well, and she knows when to ham it up for this film, but I am very excited to see, it's called Seekers of Infinite Love, directed by Victoria Strauss, and has Justin Theroux in it. I'm excited for that, but I think she is just fantastic. And then, of course, we have Gillian Anderson, who, come on, everybody loves Gillian Anderson. She's been in a billion great things. She is one of the coolest actresses of all time. I loved X-Files growing up, and I'm a huge fan of hers. I had a big crush on her when I was younger. I still do. And there's a very amazing meta element to it in the casting of Gillian Anderson, who is meant to be sort of this sexual awakening for Chris's character in some ways. And she had a big crush on her, and she loved her when she was a child. And Gillian Anderson is a queer woman who has talked about how she has had relationships with women in the past, and she's been the sexual awakening for so many young women, has been a huge inspiration for so many young women to go into the sciences or whatever it might be after X-Files, when they saw that, like, oh, I can be smart like Scully. I really, really, really enjoyed Gillian Anderson's role in this film, how she's being a little bit of a cooped up crazy woman, and she gets to sort of take on the Southern belle. Is that right? She has a really fun Southern accent, and she's playing a sort of old timey 50s actress in many ways for me. I mean, this film takes place in the modern day, but I love what Gillian Anderson is sort of doing and being this sort of old school. I don't even know how to explain it. It's just like this old school, oh, I do declare type lady who's very strong in her presence, but also has a really flirtatious nature to her. And she's really fun. She's not completely psycho because she lives out in the wild. You know, she still has connection with humanity. But I loved what her chemistry gives us with Hannah Einbinder. I love how she is leading this sort of later in life actress role in a fascinating way, in that she's sort of pushed away society and has moved away. And you see this in these horror stars or these maybe younger movie stars who don't follow up in an acting career because they age out and they sort of just end up living on the parameters or living on the outside of life in a really interesting way. And I really loved what Gillian Anderson brought to this role. And there's a bunch of other great performances in this movie. I mean, Zach Cherry shows up for a bit, who I love in Severance. He was really fun. But let's talk about the story itself and Jane Schoenbrun's directing. I'm not sure there's really anyone else like Jane Schoenbrun at the moment. I think they have a very interesting placement in Hollywood storytelling right now, and sort of, I don't know, the sort of projects that they could maybe get made, because a lot of people after TV Glow, of course, would get a billion offers to, oh, do this script, do this script, do this script. We're sort of getting that with Matt Johnson right now after Nirvana the band and after Blackberry, where he was offered big projects, and he has, not publicly declared what those projects were, but he was offered the Bourdain biopic after making some smaller films. And I have no doubt in my mind that Jane Schoenbrun had a cajillion offers, even to do like bigger franchises, like maybe horror franchises. They turned them down, and they just continued to do Camp Miasma, do their own project. Maybe their next thing that they work on will be something bigger, but obviously Camp Miasma is a love letter to the slasher genre and is trying to be this deconstruction of fandom and media interpretation and media interaction and how we interpret media, but how we can also change media in a really interesting way. And, Jane Schoenbrun, I really saw this movie as a lovely tribute to the slasher genre, to the media that made us. TV Glow is this, really cool, very depressing, albeit, story about a trans awakening and media and reality and not being able to escape certain things, versus this movie is much more about how media is an escape for pleasure and desire, and how we can take ourselves out of difficult situations and bring ourselves to more desirable places, I guess. Well, we'll get into some more heavy themes here, but the music choices in this film as well, I just want to say, were fantastic. Just to step outside of the storytelling for a moment, I just think how Jane Schoenbrun assembles the team behind this film and the things that they are adding to it is really great. The music choices, there's a lot of really grungy, sad, pixie type music, and it's just great needle drop after great needle dropped. And the handcraftedness of this movie reminds me of these old studio projects like Singing in the Rain, where Wizard of Oz, like the old school classic studio films where they would be filming on this big lot with a painted background, and you can see the painted, handcrafted nature of this film. And I think it adds really to what it's trying to say about media and like, oh, we are inside of a movie, and it's trying to sort of be a little bit more fully open-handed to you, of being like, oh, we are in a movie, and this is a movie about movies, and a movie about movies that is like making movies. It's like a weird hat on a hat on a hat on a hat, not necessarily in a bad way. And then I think there's something really special about watching this movie on 35 millimeter projected, because it's just so gorgeous to look at, seeing those big handcrafted gorgeous sets and the Camp Miasma set. And there's lots of behind the scenes videos and photos of them assembling the set and the snow, and it's just, I really enjoyed all of those little details that we get to see on social media. And the cinematography by Eric Yue, who did TV Glow as well. I think this film just looks astounding. Like there were multiple frames, or all of the nighttime scenes alone, just holy shit, they look gorgeous. They're using these old school Hollywood lighting techniques of like making the nighttime look blue instead of just like flat and dark, and using campfires as the only source of lighting. I love all the shots inside the cabin when they do have fire going as well, of course, but like there's just so much about this movie that is beautiful to look at. The story, like I said, is a love letter to horror, but it's also a very psychosexual fantasy sort of satire film. And compared to I Saw the TV Glow, this is a way more tongue-in-cheek film. Like I think this is Jane Schoenbrun taking their sensibilities in a very different direction. TV Glow is about sort of the panic you can feel in life when you wake up and realize you're living the wrong life, or you're living the wrong lifestyle and you're not who you want to be, versus this movie is much more like tongue-in-cheek, like, oh, look at how we treat film and how we treat academia within film, or how academically we treat films, and then talking about desire and orgasms and love and sexuality and all of these things, but it's doing it in a much more playful way, which I really enjoyed. And the movie's funny. Like I said, with Hannah Einbinder's little performance review, I thought she's hilarious in this movie. There's a lot of really great jokes in this film, but I do think it sometimes struggles to hold the line between the tones that it's trying to do. It's trying to do a very serious, abstract view of the slasher genre, and then it'll hop into some absurd comedy type scene of slashing teenagers and stuff like that. And it just feels like, ooh, that was a big jump. And I don't know if I was fully prepared for that, because I was so deeply invested in the very abstract, and then it jumps to this sort of campy montage. And the film, you know, doing a lot tonally and bouncing all over the place. And it's hard to really nail down what this movie is fully about. But I did just interpret this as a film basically about pleasure. This is a movie about getting out of your own head, learning to enjoy your fantasy or indulge your creative sort of outlets in life, but also your sexual fantasies, your internal fantasies. I think this is overall just a movie about like desire and pleasure, and diving into what you're curious about in life, and sort of leaving judgment at the door in a lot of ways. And I'm trying to stay non-spoiler, so I don't want to go too specifically into examples of how they're proving that in the film, obviously. And, you know, there is a meta sort of casting element with Gillian Anderson, like I said, that plays into the desire element and reading past these lines of desire and sexuality and things like that. And there's this really great saying in the film: if it gets too real, you can always turn it off. So it's sort of like this desire and fantasy, how you need to be able to detach from your fantasies and turn it off when needed. And there's been a lot of commentary about why there's so much candy and like quote unquote product placement in the film. But it's been interesting to hear Jane Schoenbrun talk about the fact that none of these brands were like sponsoring the film in any way. They just put the candy in the film because they love candy. They love movie snacks. This movie talks about, you know, reasons that candy and dipping sauces are amazing. And oh, there's such variety in them. They're excessive. They're indulgent. Like dipping sauces, you know, in Europe, you don't get dipping sauces with pizza. It's a very like North American indulgence thing. And I think that's what the slasher genre is as well. It's not a very European thing. It's very much a American 70s and 80s Halloween, Friday the 13th, all of these different things where it's like, oh, this is an American slasher horror movie, versus this movie is sort of using KFC. It's using candies to talk about desire and indulging yourself and adding things onto something that can be simple like sexuality or sex, but you're adding on these things like fantasy and desire and lust, or little add-ons that can make things a lot spicier or make things a little bit crazier. And it's, again, trying to stay non-spoilers, but it's very cool to see there's an actual employment of candy and dipping sauces in this film in a funny way. And, you know, Billy and Chris's relationship, or their dynamic in the film, is interesting because Chris is a very academic, smart, intelligent director who has thought about these films academically and written papers on them. And when she's first talking to Billy about the movies and like all of her deep academic thoughts about these films, Billy just says to her, look, you're way too academic about these films. All they were about was flesh and fluids. And I think they are much more than that, because Billy is not giving her own films enough credit or realizing how important these films were on her life and how important she was for these films and so many other people's life, and sort of the sexual awakenings of other people or the artistic awakenings of other people in a really fascinating way. Like, and that's why Gillian Anderson is such an interesting casting choice, because sometimes Gillian Anderson maybe doesn't give herself enough credit of like, yeah, I was a young sex icon. I still am. And I was the reason a lot of women went into the sciences, or women realized they were gay and they liked women. And it's very fun to see Jane Schoenbrunn playing with those themes and playing with all of these objects of desire and these sort of plot devices or plot employments or these little tricks that you can talk about these amazing themes in this film in very abstract ways, but they're very direct call outs in real life that we can all recognize if you know anything about the slasher genre, about the film entertainment industry and in general, and sort of how franchises move along as they go on and they try to find new ways to sort of, you know, Freddy in New York or whatever, Jason in New York, new ways that you can sort of freshen up the genre. And actually, I guess that brings me to one thing that I maybe didn't love about this film is the Hollywood intervention and like all the agent stuff. I'm a big fan of Sarah Sherman. I think she is very funny, but I think she is very poorly used in this film and brings a lot of credibility out of the film. I think she is sort of acting in an entirely different movie to everyone else. You know, Hannah Einbinder and Gillian Anderson are extremely authentic and real and feel like real people in this movie. They feel like real characters and lived in people versus Sarah Sherman is playing this like, oh, Hollywood agent who is trying to book Chris this film because she's her agent, the director's agent. And she makes it feel like an SNL sketch where it's like, oh, you know, wink, wink at the camera. None of this is real. We're playing make believe versus every scene that I'm watching with Chris and Billy feels like, oh, we're watching two real people who are coming at this franchise from very different ways, but are also coming at life from very different angles. And I didn't love all of the Hollywood agent stuff, all the executive meeting stuff on Zoom, funny scenes. But again, I think they're in the wrong movie for me. And on top of that, the movie has a lot to say, of course, about franchises and the growth of franchises over the years. But I'm not sure I really loved all that stuff. I think we've had enough Hollywood making fun of Hollywood and doing inside baseball with the studio, or I mean, all the way back to, you know, the producers where we're talking about movies in movies, or Singing in the Rain. It's a movie about making movies and art and stuff like that. We've gotten a lot of it. And I don't think Camp Miasma is really doing enough innovative sense of it to make it feel earned. I think it's a little bit sort of half-assed to say that in a polite way. But okay, a few things that I did love about this movie. Let me just keep going before I jump into spoilers, because I finally just want to let the floodgates go and talk about this movie a little more abstractly. The gore. I thought the gore and the violence in this movie was so goddamn funny. Little Death, the villain in this movie, is just hilarious. I love the design of them wearing like a Tyvek hazmat suit with the air conditioner head, and then they go around slashing people and it's like a fountain of blood. And then Chris is absolutely meant to stand in for Jane Schoenbrunn. I think that's the big takeaway that I had from this film, as well as like, this is a very personal film from Jane Schoenbrunn talking about how they are struggling with certain things in life, whether it is sexuality, identity, or working through fantasies. But also I think there's a lot of artistic commentary here of like, how do I think about films and art and the industry? How do I place myself within the industry that I'm working in and really make it work and try to do something original while still, you know, making a living and actually being able to afford groceries or whatever it might be and get a job. So there's just a lot of really, really, really interesting metatextual things about this movie. But let's move into 2 stars and a wish, and then we'll jump into spoilers. Star number 1, I mean, just great performances from Einbinder and Anderson. I had a blast watching them on screen. Every time they're on screen together, this movie absolutely soars. I think it is gorgeously hilarious. It's beautiful. Every scene they share together is so intimate and real and authentic. I thought they were dynamite together. Star number 2, this is a movie that is like watching a painting, you know, with the actual crafted backgrounds and the real sets, and everything just feels so authentic in camera. Watching it on 35 millimeter as well just added a whole other layer of dynamicism to it. And then my wish is just a little more tonal control between the really funny moments and the dramatic moments. Sometimes it feels like a little bit too much of a gear shift where I'm like, holy shit, okay, now we're doing the comedy, and it really throws me out of it. But look, overall, I really enjoyed Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma. Seeing it with a diverse crowd who clearly identify what's going on with the film and are part of the communities that are represented in this film was just really special for me. And I think this movie is just really funny. It's really endearing as someone that enjoys most things that are talking about Hollywood and filmmaking in general. This film has a lot of interesting things to say about it. So I gave Camp Miasma, or Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma as the full title, 4 stars out of 5. Let's get into spoilers. Alrighty, spoilers for Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma. Let's start with Little Death. Now, Little Death is the French euphemism for orgasm. This is a movie about the little deaths in life: horniness, desire. The villain being, Little Death in all of these Camp Miasma films, which are notoriously about like horny teenagers. This is a movie about every orgasm in life and how he strikes again, he needs to feed, or Little Death is coming for me and once again I need to feed him, and there's a hole at the bottom of the lake and it needs to be fed. This is like about primal urges and sexuality and desire. I love Little Death. I think Little Death is a cool villain, and the way that Jane Schoenbrun explains Little Death and explores that. Little Death specifically coming for all of these teens who are like 18 years old, of course, peak horniness, and are all over each other like every single classic slasher film. There's enough to be said about all of the Little Death stuff being horniness and desire in this film. But what I also liked is the explanation of transness in this film and trans identity. Obviously, I saw the TV Glow as a really interesting exploration of being trans and finding yourself with your trans identity and like realizing, oh, I've been living my life as something that I'm not, and my brain is rewired as something that my body wasn't born as. And I really appreciated TV Glow bringing that sort of life experience to the screen for people to understand and how it can feel when you're wasting away and it can literally kill you. And this film is using trans identity, I think, in a very different way, because it's more so exploring the villainization. Is that a word? Villainization? Vilification? I think that's it. I don't know. Maybe I should give that a Google. But how villains are often, oh, it's a trans person, and how in this film, Little Death, in the first Camp Miasma film, they tell this ghost story around the fire that, oh, Little Death was raised as a boy 2 days of the week, and then the next 2 days as a girl, and each of their parents were raising them as a boy and a girl, and that, it's essentially a transgender character that's being demonized and labeled as this horrendous creation that is terrifying for everyone to look at or think about and all this stuff. And it was a very interesting ghost story around a campfire that you would have seen in movies 20 years ago and would have been extremely popular. But obviously now society has come to its senses in some ways and been like, yeah, that was fucked up, the way we were demonizing these people who are clearly going through very difficult things because they have to find themselves in life. And then once they're out and proud, we're still demonizing them. And it's like, what are we doing? But Little Death, I really liked all the scenes with Jack Haven, I believe is their name. They were also in TV Glow. They're trans actor, and they are playing Little Death, who is in this really abstract, very David Lynchian. And I haven't even mentioned David Lynch yet in this review. Obviously, this film is very Lynchian because Jane Schoenbrun has constantly referenced David Lynch. I think TV Glow is extremely David Lynch in some ways, and how melancholic it is and how sad and just like slow and meditative it can feel. This film brings out sort of the campiness and the sort of, I think, the really great sense of humor that David Lynch had sometimes in his works. And the design of this film is very fascinating, with the half man, half woman costume that Jack Haven is wearing in that the bathroom scene that they have, where it's like this black tile bathroom that they're like dancing around in and moving around and looking at themselves in the mirror, where they're half man, half woman, trying to figure out their identity. I think this film isn't, fully about trans identity, but it's of course going to have that at least as a discussion, given that Jane Schoenbrun is a trans filmmaker who is still trying to work through their trans identity within their filmography and sort of shed how they're feeling or shed light on how they're feeling with the public. And I just really appreciated all of that. But what I want to talk about as well next is just Billy and Chris sharing their sort of sexual histories or the issues they've had with sex in the past and exploring themselves sexuality wise and desire wise. So at one point in the film, Billy explains that during the sexual assault that she went through during the filming of Camp Miasma, because we see the first Camp Miasma film, there's a sex scene where Billy was a young actress and she has to have sex with a younger, or rather another actor that is like at Camp Miasma, who's playing the love interest male of the film, who is killed while they're having sex when they get killed in the film. So the story is that she was actually sexually assaulted during that scene, and that's where that fear really comes out. And there's this really interesting comparison of watching that film or watching that scene once in this movie and then you watch it again. When we first see that scene in the film, or actually we see it 3 times, the first time it is Hannah Einbinder as Chris watching it alone in her hotel room. she's writing notes in a notebook, and all she writes down is desire because that's all she sees. And that's how we look at old films or old things or things that are acted. We see certain themes that are only on screen and that are meant to be conveyed, versus when she watches it with Billy, it is very sad and she's scared and she starts to get emotional about it. And then Billy shares the story that during that scene, she was actually terrified because she was a virgin and she didn't know anything about her own sexuality and she hadn't been sexual before. Of course, this was her first sexual encounter and she's being sexually assaulted during a scene, and she's learning that you can transport yourself by thinking of other places and fantasizing, and you can escape pain through media. And she's literally thinking about little death coming for her, and she's like sort of fantasizing in the moment. And it's like this great moment of sort of disassociation, and how disassociation and media can transport us from the pains of our own lives. And I think that's what this movie is really trying to get at in some ways, like Jane Schronbrun's other work, where movies can take us out of reality, but reality can be reflected in movies and entertainment overall. How there's that duality of like one is affecting another, and it's the fake providing the real providing the reaction of afraid. And within the story, there's all these metatextual layers, and like we see that scene 3 times throughout this film. One time it's explained, Chris writes down desire, and that's all she writes in her notebook. Next time we watch it, it's cut off at like her favorite image within the scene, and they don't really talk about it, and it just ends abruptly. The third time that we see the film, we're not watching it directly, but it's being explained to us, because that's when Billy is telling the story that she was actually fantasizing in that scene. She was terrified because she was about to be sexually assaulted, but she sort of fantasized that little death was coming for her, and that's how she orgasmed, and she actually was able to enjoy sex in the future by imagining that little death was sort of coming to end it and kill her. Again, really interesting sort of intertwining of the fake, the real, the horror, the pleasure, the desire, and how there's like moments of escape that can be provided, and it's layered of horror on top of desire and like positive experiences. A lot of really interesting things that you can pick apart in so many of the sexual scenes in this film. And again, for people that are like, oh, Gen Z don't want to see sex on film, and for all the annoying one night only directors in the world, there is very useful things about sex in film and art and life in general. For all these people that are like, oh, you should keep your sexuality to yourself, and sex should be a private thing at home between your doors or whatever. Society should be talking about sex and sexuality and personalities and how we live our lives, and can have these shared experiences, because they can help others realize what is real, what is not real, what is shared among, common people and all over the place. And I think this film is doing that in a really interesting way of like desire and fantasy can help you unlock certain things about yourself. Like Chris in this film, Hannah Einbinder's character, admits that she has always had a really tough time with sex and her sexuality, and she can actually only enjoy sex if she is fantasizing herself as a sexualized final girl. And Billy encourages her to further explore that and, indulge in that fantasy as it's only play. It's not real. And, you can engage with this very cheesy, poorly made thing like a Camp Miasma film, but also a cheap fantasy. And it can actually serve a great purpose in helping you with artistic merit or artistic endeavors, but also with your sexual endeavors. So, there's a lot going into this film. As you can tell, I don't have it all quite figured out, because I think it is an extremely dense film that is saying a lot about desire, pleasure, the horrors that we experience in life, and how you can escape those through fantasy and play and different experiences that you go through. There's also like the indulgence of fantasies, of course. Like Chris has this really hilarious Zoom call. Even though I didn't enjoy the Hollywood aspects of this film, there is this Zoom call where she's like, little death is real, and she's having like an abstract or like a huge sort of existential crisis in her own car. And then she goes back to Miasma, where she's with Billy and she engages in her fantasy. She's chased by little death. She watches him kill her partner, her agent, her superiors, and then Chris is chased to a cabin where Billy is waiting there, and she is the final girl with Billy and finally able to indulge in her first full sexual encounter of the film, because they tried to have a sexual encounter earlier. She's not able to get out of her own head, and she's very sexually frustrated, but we can see in this moment desire is a little more easy, and it's just a really interesting way that they're able to get Chris out of her own head by indulging with that fantasy. And I thought Hannah Einbinder just plays the campness, the comedy, the fantasy, the desire, all of those elements in the film in that particular moment really well in the third act. And Gillian Anderson is great as Billy, of course. I think she is just very great as sort of the guiding light for that. And ultimately, you know, this is just a film about entertainment and escape and reality and what we can make real from media that we're watching and we can bring into our own lives to provide relief. And then as much as we use films and entertainment as an escape, they can tell us about ourselves. They can tell us about the world and reality and very hard things that we are going through. I really enjoyed how, like I said, dense, I think is very good for this movie. That's a good word for this movie because there's so many little elements that you can pick apart in Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma. I think that's all I have for spoilers, really. That's going to do it for Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma, though. Let's get into what else I watched. Alrighty, what else I watched? Well, I have 4 movies, 4 TV shows to talk about. Let's start with TV shows, starting with Lanterns. Oh my God. You know, I think the trailers were pretty good for this show. I think the second one specifically sold me, but man, I loved this show. I thought episode 1 did everything I needed it to do. There are Green Lanterns. They're fully just doing Green Lantern stuff. And like the young Jon Stewart learning from Hal, who is this grizzled veteran who has like revealed himself to the public as Green Lantern in 1996 and then trying to pass on the torch. I think it did such a great job setting things up while also setting up so many questions for the future of the show. And I'm so excited for where could this possibly go from here. Check out my spoiler reviews every Monday that I'm posting on social media because I'm going to keep doing that. I love doing a weekly TV show catch up. Like, it's appointment viewing. This is really something that you need to watch on HBO every single week. Speaking of shows that are good superhero shows, My Adventures with Superman season 3 episode 10, The Return. This was the finale for season 3. We aren't really sure if the show is coming back. Jack Quaid has publicly talked about like thanking everyone for the role, and he was so happy that he got to play Superman for several years, but he's not sure if the show is coming back because they haven't been renewed. Apparently James Gunn and Peter Safran were actually like big advocates for this show and were a huge reason that Warner Brothers has continued it because they were like, this is great. It's Superman property. It's fun. It's animated. Let's keep going. And they're going to also do a Green Lanterns animated, like My Adventures with Green Lantern animated show. I'm excited for that, but I thought the finale was just like really fun. It was emotionally impactful. It was cool to see Kal-El in the traditional Kryptonian type armor that he was wearing, and there was just a lot of stuff that I loved about it. I think it really left the characters in an emotionally vulnerable place. Like, you know, Clark and Lois are very fulfilled, and Lois proposing to Clark is just, yeah, makes total sense. Lois Lane would do that. And then we have, you know, Kara and Jimmy Olsen and their love affair sort of being a little bit of a mix-up. Very exciting stuff. I really hope we get a season 4 because I would love to see where the characters go from here. Another show that started this week was It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, season 18. We had episode 1, Frank Marries a Corpse, and episode 2, Dennis and Dee Don't Get Rich. I think what I'm really loving about these later stages of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, the last few seasons, they're doing a new thing every episode that's also paying homage to the older stuff, but at the same time, they're doing little bits of crossover and like a full season arc kind of thing. So last season was The Golden Bachelor with Frank, and then this season is like Frank having to get over that and marrying a corpse and saying goodbye to Charlie's mom. I thought the first 2 episodes were really funny. I was constantly chuckling. There's great jokes here and there. I don't think they lit the world on fire and they were like the greatest episodes of It's Always Sunny. I thought the stuff with Mac's dad was really good, even if it's kind of stealing from Arrested Development a little bit with the twin dad and uncle type thing, but really good. I think they're off to a smashing start. Really excited to see the rest of the season because it has very good reviews already. Then the last TV show I watched was Anthony Bourdain, No Reservations, episode 4 and 5 of season 7. So episode 4 was on Vienna. Anthony Bourdain sort of goes there thinking he's not going to be into Vienna because of all these assumptions that he has. Once again, he's proven wrong. I was in Vienna last summer, absolutely loved the city. It was gorgeous. Then he goes to the Ozarks and once again has all these assumptions, but is actually very into it and is like, oh, it's cool. There's a whole culture here of great food and great people and a historically rich place. You know, I've been listening to a lot of interviews with Matt Johnson and the cast of Tony after Tony came out, and it's really cool to hear them sort of following up and talking about why Tony is such a different kind of biopic, and how what I said in my review, that, you know, there doesn't need to be necessarily true stories or true actions to get at a universal truth of who the man was. And I want to rewatch Tony now because I think it was so interesting. Let's talk about some movies though. Last weekend, my girlfriend and I watched Speed. We just felt like watching a 90s classic. I think Speed is a movie that I love to watch every single year because it's the perfect sort of classic 90s action, adrenaline pumping, sexual tension. It has all the things. I love Speed. I think it's everything that I love about 90s action, how it's like a cool plot device of there's a bomb on a bus, can't go under 50 miles per hour, make sure you stay above it and go. All right. And, it's all these fun things, and it's how many great entertaining things can take place on a bus by itself. But I think what a lot of people also forget about Speed is how much is happening before the bus and outside of the bus with the main character, Jack. I love everything Keanu Reeves is doing in that film. Sandra Bullock obviously was like her first big role and sort of made a name for her. They're adorable together. I think it probably has like one of the worst final lines in a 90s action ever, where it's like, well, we'll have to find that out through sex. And he's like, yes, ma'am. And I was like, oh God, what are we doing here? Didn't enjoy that element, but I mean, the action, the stunts, how the film looks is fantastic. There's times where it looks like it's golden hour and it's late in the day when all of this is supposed to be taking place before 11 a.m. So a little bit of continuity errors there, but Speed is just like one of those action films that I'll never get tired of. It's flashy, it's sexy, it's so damn intense while containing the most cheeseball shit of the 90s, and Keanu and Sandy are just sensational. I gave it 4 stars. I think there's some very flawed, cheesy things about it, but very fun movie. After that, I watched The Wrong Girls, starring Kristen Stewart, who I adore, and Alia Shawkat, Lakeith Stanfield, Zach Fox, Tony Hale, Chris Estrada, Thomas LaBarbera Christensen. Very funny movie. It also has Seth Rogen and Kumail Nanjiani playing cats. It is a stoner comedy about these two friends who accidentally get involved in the scientific experiment thing where Kristen Stewart looks identical to another girl, and she is a case of mistaken identity. Very funny stoner comedy that is very Bill and Ted, Nirvana the band, the show, the movie. It suits a lot of the things that I love about stoner comedies. I gave it 3 stars. Kristen Stewart, very funny in the movie. Then I watched Spider-Man 3, of course, rounding out the trilogy. Every week I have been watching one of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. This one was a rough watch. I actually think this was like one of the least enjoyable Spider-Man 3 watches that I've had in a little while. I found a lot of it to be very hollow, and all of the endearing things from the first 2 films are very absent in this movie. Instead, it's like a story of excess and Sam Raimi losing the character moments that made the first 2 movies so special to me. So I gave it 3 stars. Obviously, the symbiote looks sick as fuck. The suit is so cool, but it's just a bit of a mess. And then the final movie that I watched this week, Titanic. We saw it in the Christie Pitts Outdoor Picture Show, or the Toronto Outdoor Picture Show. It was their final weekend of outdoor pictures for the summer. Titanic Friday night, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes on Saturday night, and then Little Miss Sunshine on Sunday night. So I saw it on the Friday night. Titanic, packed crowd. Man, Titanic just never gets old. It's just so full of romance and sexual tension, and it's just like lovely for the first 2 hours. Then it's a tragedy for the last hour that makes you feel horrible. I mean, there was not a single dry eye in all of Christie Pitt Park last night. I really, really, really enjoyed it. I've seen this movie on and off, like little clips here and there, or it's a movie that you'll sit down and watch an hour and a half of on TV. But I think the first time I fully watched Titanic was maybe in high school. I think. And then the first time I fully watched it as an adult was only last year on November 1st. Talked about it on the show. So last night was like my second time with my frontal lobe fully developed, almost watching Titanic. I say almost because I don't think it's fully there yet, but it's just so Big Jim doing what he does best. The grandness, the humanity, the action, the adrenaline, and I love it. I gave it 4.5 stars. That has been what else I watched. And in fact, I think that's going to do it for episode 133, Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma. What an episode it's been. Very difficult movie to fully parse out my thoughts with, because there's just like little nuggets here and there that you can really break apart. And then you have the dipping sauces of story and desire. I'm trying to do a KFC pun here. I don't know if it's fully working, but the nuggets of story, the dipping sauces of sexuality and desire and horror slasher films, finished off with a candy dessert of Jolly Ranchers that have a solid middle and chewy outside. That almost worked. But anyways, as always, please rate and review the show 5 stars wherever you get your great podcasts like Watcher of All Things, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Acast, or of course an Acast produced show. If you're on Spotify, you can comment right underneath the episode. Let me know what you thought of Gene Schoenbrun's newest film, Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma. Leave a 5-star rating, share it with a friend on any of the podcasting apps. It helps the show grow, get engagement, all that good stuff. If you're on the YouTube channel, where we recently hit 1,000 subscribers, thank you so much. I'm going to put out a new video soon, maybe just talking about, I don't know, the summer movies and how we are kind of back in the film industry, but maybe we aren't. I don't know yet. Hit like, subscribe, comment down below on this video. What's been your favorite movie of the summer? What'd you think of this movie? What TV shows are you watching at the moment? All of that good stuff. Are you going to TIFF? What are you going to watch at TIFF? Let me know. I'd love to hear from you, and hit the notification bell so you know when new videos or podcast episodes drop. If you want to get in touch with the show, you can email me, watcherofallthings@gmail.com, and find me on social media. Instagram and Threads are just at Watcher of All Things. Then the TikTok account is at watcher.of.all.things. I post on social media every single day. Like I said, every Monday we have a Lanterns review drop. It is a full spoiler breakdown. Very excited to do that every Monday for the next 8 or 10 weeks, whatever it is. I'll also post lots of coverage and videos from TIFF, so check all of that stuff out. You can also follow my personal Letterboxd account, KikiJ70. That's KIKIJ70. Follow me on there. Drop a comment under one of my reviews that you found me through the show. I will follow you back. Let's build a little community. Next week, we have a lot of stuff to talk about. I'm seeing Mutiny. I'm seeing Finding Emily. I'm seeing Coyote versus Acme. I'm also going to see the Dog Stars, because next week's episode is either going to be about the Dog Stars or Coyote versus Acme. I'm also apartment hunting right now, so it's a little bit busy, but that will be next week. Thank you all so much for listening, for all the kind messages I get from you guys every single week. Hope you have had a fantastic summer. We are almost at Labor Day, where we are getting into the fall movie season. Lots of Oscar contenders. The big festival releases finally hitting the mainstream. I'm excited to talk about it all, but that'll do it for this week's episode. Thank you all so much for listening. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one.